It was a regular Friday, 7th period, the final class of the week, the only thing standing between us and spring break. Everyone in the room was restless, waiting for the bell to ring so we could finally be free. Unlike some of my friends, I was lucky. I didn't have a test that day. Our teacher was one of those rare, laid-back types. Instead of lecturing, he decided to play a game with us. A brand logo quiz on the projector. The entire class was engaged, laughing, throwing out answers. It was the kind of moment where you forget you're even in school. And then, it happened. The loudspeaker crackled to life. The dean's voice came through, but something was wrong. He wasn't speaking in that usual bored tone we were used to. Number. This time, he was frantic, panicked. This is not a drill. Teachers, go into lockdown, now. For a moment, the room was frozen. Then, the mood shifted instantly. My stomach dropped. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I glanced at my friends, expecting some kind of reassurance that this was all some mistake. But the look on their faces told me they were thinking the same thing. Our teacher didn't hesitate. The man who was always so relaxed, so easygoing. He was suddenly dead serious. He ran to the light switch, flicked it off, and motioned for all of us to move. Back corner now. Desks scraped against the floor as we scrambled to the far end of the room. We huddled together in the dark, our breathing the only sound. The windows were covered, but somehow it still felt like we were exposed. Like someone was watching us. 2 minutes passed, then 3, and then the humming sound in the back of the room stopped. That sound had always been there, so constant that no one ever paid attention to it. But now, its sudden silence was deafening. The power had been cut. That's when we realized this wasn't just some false alarm. This was real. The silence in the room was unbearable. No one dared to speak. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. The only sound was the faint rustling of clothes as we shifted uncomfortably in our cramped hiding spot. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like the entire class could hear it. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing, but nothing could stop the creeping dread slithering through my body. And then, somewhere down the hallway, footsteps, heavy, slow, deliberate. They weren't the hurried footsteps of a teacher trying to check on classrooms. They weren't the shuffling steps of a lost student. They had weight. They had purpose. And worst of all, they were getting closer. A voice suddenly tore through the silence, deep, angry, inhuman. At first, it was just a roar of frustration, an unintelligible string of words that made my stomach twist into knots. Then, as it got closer, the words became clearer.
I'll kill all of you!
The sound sent a jolt of terror through my body. This wasn't just some random person causing a scene. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was real. Someone was in the school, and they wanted blood. The door handle to our classroom rattled. My breath caught in my throat. The man was trying to get in. And then he started slamming on the door with both fists. The pounding on the door wouldn't stop. Each hit was harder than the last, shaking the entire frame. It sounded like he wasn't just using his fists anymore, like he was throwing his entire weight into it. I gritted my teeth, pressing my back against the cold wall. My mind was racing. Was the door strong enough to hold? Could the lock actually keep him out? The worst part, we weren't sure if he was alone. Somewhere down the hall, I could still hear the echoes of his earlier screams. Had he come in alone, or were there others? The thought made my stomach churn.
I said open the door.
Another slam. This time, something different. A sharp, metallic clank followed the impact. He was hitting it with something heavy. My teacher held a finger to his lips, eyes darting toward the crying girl in the back. Her hands were shaking, clamped over her mouth, but her body was trembling too hard to contain the quiet sobs. I knew it wasn't her fault. None of us had ever been in a situation like this before, but the sound, no matter how quiet, felt deafening. The man outside suddenly stopped. Complete, suffocating silence. Then, the handle turned. I held my breath. It twisted, jerking back and forth, testing the lock, searching for weakness. My body was completely stiff. I was afraid that even the smallest movement would somehow make a noise and give us away. Then, he laughed. That laugh, it was wrong, like something out of a nightmare. A second later, the pounding stopped completely. I waited. My hands were ice cold, my breathing shallow. I wanted to believe he was gone. I wanted to believe he had moved on to another hallway, another classroom, but my gut told me otherwise. And I was right, because suddenly, the sound of footsteps, not walking away, walking inside our classroom. I felt my blood go cold. We all looked up at the same time, our eyes darting toward the closet, the classroom storage closet. The door had been opened. I hadn't even thought about it before. It was just a closet, a place where the teacher stored extra supplies, old textbooks, broken chairs. No one ever used it. But now we realized the horrifying truth. He was inside the closet the whole time, and we had just locked ourselves in the room with him. For a second, no one moved, no one spoke. Our minds were frozen, trapped in the horrifying realization. The man was inside the closet the whole time. Then, a creak. Slow, subtle. The closet door was opening. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. A dark sliver widening, shadows shifting inside. My breath hitched. I wanted to look away, but my body refused to move. And then, a boot stepped out. Dust clung to the scuffed leather. It barely made a sound against the gold tile, but the sight of it made my heart stop. A second foot followed. Then, he emerged. His face was half hidden beneath the brim of a dirty dark red baseball cap. His clothes, faded jeans and a wrinkled plaid shirt, looked normal. But his eyes weren't normal. Wide, unblinking, hungry. I could barely breathe. The man stood still for a moment, head slightly tilted as if he were listening. The only light in the room came from the emergency exit sign, casting eerie red shadows along the walls. Then, he moved. Slow, too slow. He stepped forward, his boots making a faint tap, tap, tap. He was listening for us, smelling the fear in the air. My teacher clenched his fists, pressing his back against the wall. I could tell. He was trying to think, trying to come up with a plan. But what could he do? We were cornered, trapped like animals, and the only thing standing between us and this lunatic was the darkness. And then, the worst possible thing happened. One of the crying girls let out a quiet, shaky breath. He stopped. The man froze mid-step. Then, his head snapped toward us. My stomach dropped. He knew we were here. For a second, everything was silent. Time stretched unbearably long. Then, he lunged.
I found you.
A scream tore through the air as he rushed toward us. The entire class erupted in chaos. People scrambled backward, knocking over chairs, shoving desks, trying to get as far away as possible. Someone tripped, hitting the floor hard with a thud. My teacher, God bless him, charged forward. I didn't even see him move at first. 1 second, we were frozen in terror. The next, he was slamming into the intruder, pushing him backward. The man let out a grunt, stumbling back, but he wasn't weak. He fought back, grabbing onto my teacher's shirt, trying to get a grip on him. That's when I saw it. A glint of metal, something tucked into his waistband. A knife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to warn my teacher. But my voice was gone. I could only watch. Time seemed to stretch impossibly long as the man and my teacher struggled on the floor. The sounds of their fight echoed in the silent classroom, punctuated by the man's furious growls and my teacher's strained grunts. I could see the panic in my teacher's eyes. He was fighting for his life, and we were all helpless, watching from the shadows. The man's grip tightened around his knife, and I saw it flash under the dim emergency light. For a terrifying moment, I thought we were all going to witness something horrible. My throat went dry as I realized my teacher might not make it out of this. But then, there was a sudden movement from the back of the room, a loud bang as a desk tipped over, and suddenly, the man's attention wavered just for a fraction of a second. That was enough. My teacher took advantage of the brief distraction, throwing the man off him with a desperate shove. The man stumbled backward, crashing into a row of chairs. But before he could regain his balance, my teacher lunged for something, anything, to defend himself. He grabbed a metal chair and swung it with all his strength, hitting the man in the side. The force of the blow sent the man stumbling, but he didn't go down. He was enraged, eyes wild, bloodshot, and crazed with fury. "You think you can stop me?" the man screamed, his voice raspy and broken, as if he had been shouting for hours. He lunged again, aiming the knife with precision. But my teacher wasn't going down without a fight. With one hand still gripping the chair, he used it as a shield, blocking the man's assault. The blade scraped against the metal with a screech, sending sparks flying. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw the man's knife come closer, so close that I could almost feel the cold steel against my own skin. The door. I glanced toward the door, now a faint outline in the dark. The man had blocked our only escape, but if we could just get to it. It seemed like an impossible dream, but we didn't have time to think about that. The fight was getting more intense by the second. I could see my teacher's hands trembling from the effort, his face drenched in sweat, but his resolve was unwavering. He wasn't going to let this madman get the best of him. The door, a simple door just a few feet away, but it felt like it was miles out of reach. The only way out. I glanced at the others, frozen, some crying, others too terrified to move. But there was no time. Without thinking, I ran. I didn't care if it was dangerous. I didn't care if the man was going to follow me. I had to get to that door. But the moment I reached it, the sound of the door handle rattling stopped me in my tracks. It wasn't the teacher trying to escape. It wasn't even one of the students. It was the man. I turned around, my heart slamming against my chest. The man was already there, closer than I thought, his face twisted with rage. His hand was on the door handle. The door wouldn't open. We were trapped. The room went dark. Blackness. And then, all I could hear was the sound of his voice, low and menacing, growing closer. "You can't run from me." And in that moment, I knew none of us would ever leave this room.